We're on pace to hire more police officers this year than any other time in our department's history, illustrating the city's renewed commitment to public safety and to community engagement.
Well, that's Seattle Police Chief Sean Barnes speaking out this week about a major turnaround in police recruiting for the city. What does this mean for the future of the department? And what kind of recruits is the city attracting? Plus, more SPD issues this week, charting a path forward for accountability as 2 more officers allege the department discriminated against them on the basis of their race. We're also looking at the recently approved state budget, nude beach management. Never thought I'd say that on the podcast, but we're doing that and more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and I'm joined by my erstwhile co-host, David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, I got to ask, if I asked you 3 weeks ago who would be in first place in the American League West, would your answer have been the Seattle Mariners? Got to throw it out there.
No, certainly not. They looked really bad, and I thought it was going to be a disaster year. And it could still be, but it isn't right now. It looks pretty good right now.
I like that. It could be a disaster, but it's not yet. That's a right way to look at it. Thank you, David. As always, thanks also to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks always to our show patrons. Really appreciate you. Hoping to get a few more of you on board. Remember, patrons get access to Patrons First content before anybody else, and you get this cool decal sent to you. Just a few of the many benefits of becoming a patron of the show. You can start by pledging just $5 a month. Head to Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon, and please offer your support. Also, thanks to Converge Media, the video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's rock. Time for Right Here, Right Now. David, some really big news for the Seattle Police Department this week. 60 new officers, we are hearing, have been hired since the beginning of the year. That's 6 times as many as this time last year. And there are 160 applicants right now going through background checks to try to become an officer of the SPD. Chief Sean Barnes says he is aiming for 200 people to join the force this year. We'll see how that goes. That will be more than any other time in the city's history. And I know we've touched on this issue before, David, but I wanted to go over it again. Basically, the city council gave 23% pay raises to the SPD last year. Starting salaries over $100,000, the highest in the state. The signing bonuses up to $50,000. But looking at all that and putting that aside for a second, were you surprised to see this big of a jump in numbers for this early part of 2025?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised to see these numbers. 60 at this point in time is really, pretty significant, because considering last year was hailed as a success because they had hired more than they brought in. But even still, last year, they'd only actually hired 84 for the whole year. And that was really right under the wire. I think they hired the 84th like hours before, the clock struck midnight on New Year's. So 60 at this point is pretty unambiguously a shift in how things are going with the Seattle Police Department. And last year felt a little political, the celebrations. But, this year, I think I have a hard time finding any reason not to kind of point this out as a significant change in momentum.
Yeah, for sure. And the dollar is certainly a part of this. Maybe new leadership, I'm guessing, plays a role here too, because Chief Diaz was caught up in so many different allegations and issues through the better part of last year. I have to think that's a piece of this too.
Yeah, I think that might be a piece of it. I think I will always go with money as being the easiest explanation for it. And I just think, the starting salaries here are quite good. You can be working, you can be making $115,000 within 6 months of being on the job, plus, signing bonuses and things like that. So, I think the city council of the past, sort of fading into the rearview mirror. And I think that probably contributes to some of the interest, but I will always go with money being the primary explanation here.
That's fair. I did want to talk about hiring women, because the SPD has a goal to have 30% of its sworn officers be women by the year 2030, which is 5 years away. That is definitely not happening right now. The chief alluded to this a little bit. How much of a concern is this for the SPD, do you think? And I'm thinking about culture change and what needs to happen there. And I have to think hiring more women might be an important part of that.
Well, and it was, was a stated goal in theory to have 30% women by 2030. That is almost certainly not going to happen. Yeah, I mean, it's objectively, by their own metrics, a failure that they haven't done that. I think that is partially the result of the environment that has been put out there quite publicly about the Seattle Police Department. I think a lot of it too is just that is what it is as far as who tends to work in the police arena. There's a lot of the funnel tends to come disproportionately from military, and that's disproportionately male field as well. And so I think it's a combination of the headlines of the last couple of years to the Seattle Police Department, and also just the realities of kind of what they're working against.
Yeah, I'm going to keep going down this path a little bit here with you, David, because we had more police news this week in Seattle. 2 more officers have filed a lawsuit against the city of Seattle on charges of discrimination. Officers Corey Foy and Michael Griffin say they were harassed by coworkers, singled out by supervisors due to their race. Of course, Seattle settled a retaliation claim with a captain who was black for nearly $1 million in early April. We have several ongoing race and gender discrimination claims against the SPD. I was just looking at this, David, because as much as the SPD wants to celebrate recruiting, this is just not a healthy recurring issue here. What do you make of these new claims?
Yeah, it seems to be part of a long tail. I mean, there have been a lot of lawsuits lately. I've lost track, but it's not the first alleging this kind of discrimination and retaliation. There was Detective Cookie Bolden, who was, quite well respected in the community, and there, the I think communications head, I can't remember his name right now, John O'Neill, I want to say,
right,
filed a similar claim. His was sort of a counter claim because there had been allegations against him as well from some women, and so I think just because there's this piece of news about Seattle Police Department bringing on more people doesn't mean that the kind of issues of the recent years haven't evaporated or anything like that. And I think this is kind of fits well into a lot of allegations that we've been hearing lately about the Seattle Police Department.
Yeah. This is another example, unfortunately. I do think it's interesting to point out that during this week, the city is really kind of ramping up its process to find a new director for its Office of Police Accountability. If you remember, folks, Gino Betts was in that position, resigned rather abruptly last fall following concerns over how he handled complaints surrounding Chief Diaz. The council is talking about this issue in committee this week, including how to even proceed when there are complaints specifically against a police chief. David, I was just looking at this, the SPD's past problems, some of the ones we're talking about now, what appears to be this longstanding need for culture change. What kind of OPA director does the Seattle Police Department need? I think we're talking about a Superman here, but I'm just trying to figure out who fills this role and what the SPD needs in terms of oversight going forward.
Yeah, I think, frankly, they just didn't anticipate when they passed a lot of these that this would be something that they would have to deal with,
Right.
It was, they passed this big suite of accountability legislation in 2017, kind of codified the roles of the Office of Police Accountability, the Office of Inspector General, and the Community Police Commission. But at the time, they just had not anticipated that the chiefs of police would be such topics of interest. Because it's really two in a row. I mean, Carmen Best and her missing text messages, and also her, a lot of the decisions around the East Precinct and use of tear gas and things like that. Then, Adrian Diaz right on her, right on the tail of all that, kind of with his issues. And so I think what we're seeing here with this legislation is just reacting to a scenario that nobody at the time anticipated. I covered those deliberations to pass that accountability legislation. I don't remember it ever coming up a single time to consider, hey, what are we going to do if the police chief is under investigation? And so, that's what they had passed some rules around this. They seem to be kind of making tweaks to adjustments to that legislation. Not entirely surprising considering they're sort of legislating this issue, building this plane as they're flying it, so to speak.
Yeah, it certainly feels like that. I'm interested to see how this OPA director search continues here. I know it's something where the mayor actually made a lot more of his candidates public. I remember actually speaking with Gino Betts in a forum type of situation before he was even selected for the job. It's changed a little bit over the years. I'm interested to see how this process goes forward, too. All right, well, I did want to talk about something up next with you here, David. The state legislature just wrapped up its 105-day session with a new budget, which the governor has not signed yet. What are some of the cuts and tax hikes connected to this budget? And hang on, Is there yet another connection to police hiring? You bet there is. We're going to update you on what's happening coming up next on Now Hear This. Well, it was a frantic end to the legislative session this past weekend. The Democratic majority pushed through a $78 billion budget package that not one Republican voted for. The budget includes an 8% boost in spending, which the governor says he will be examining line by line as he takes the next 20 days, as allowed by law, to see what he's going to approve and possibly not approve by line item veto.
What I've emphasized is a balanced approach. It's a real challenge we have. Appreciate the hard work of the legislature these past 100 days or so. But of course, I'll be taking a close look to see, what stays in the budget and what might need to come out.
David, I was interested in this budget because I saw that this push for a wealth tax on people worth over $50 million was notably not part of the budget proposal that came out of the Democratic camp here. Ferguson was really against this idea from the beginning, says it wasn't really tested, was really unsure if it was worth pinning our whole state budget on bringing in something with a new tax there. So what was left behind was a mishmash of taxes on businesses, an expanded sales tax on tech services, an added capital gains tax, even an added gas tax, too, for the transportation budget. I just had this idea that, or this question, I suppose, did Democrats just make our tax system more regressive? Is that possible? What do you make of this session here? Any thoughts on that? Just some overall ideas?
Yeah, for my money, the session, I mean, the big storyline, I think, for me was, well, the Democrats really didn't make any effort to make this a bipartisan budget. You can take that for how you want it, but it is what it is. Republicans the whole time were calling for cuts and furloughs and things like that. And
right.
This budget does not do that.
No.
And the Democrats and the new governor, Bob Ferguson, have not really been in line at all with one another. He is governed much more moderately than I think a lot of the Democrats in the legislature would like. He's been skeptical of new taxes. I mean, like you mentioned, the wealth tax, that's the clear one. But, he's also hasn't. It'll be interesting kind of how he approaches this budget. I would be surprised if he, sends it back to the legislature and calls it a special session in his first session as governor. That would be a pretty intense step. But at the same time, like you said, it does include a lot of tax hikes. Some pretty big businesses that have come out really strongly against this budget. Businesses that I think, at least on a local level, have been fairly supportive of Democratic priorities,
right,
particularly around transportation investments and things like that, have been really critical of how this session has gone from Democrat perspective. And if the allegation is that Democrats are just going to keep raising taxes, this certainly doesn't do anything to dispel that. If you're a Republican, you probably have your campaign materials all ready to go. I will point out that the gas tax piece, that was a more bipartisan. Was a more bipartisan measure.
That's a good point.
Senator Curtis King, I think announced the transportation budget alongside, Mark Elias and Jake Fye, the transportation chairs.
Yes.
Andrew Barkas, I think, was a little more skeptical about it, but he did vote for the transportation budget in the end. So I think we can kind of take the gas tax to me is kind of its own whole thing.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah.
And that's my read on it. That's not how it's being presented in the public. It is being lumped in with all these other taxes, but I do think that stands out a little bit because there was bipartisan support to raise the gas taxes, and I think is reflective of an understanding that the transportation system that they're trying to build is severely underfunded, and an unwillingness to go down the road of a road usage charge just yet. No pun intended. And so gas tax ended up winning the day there, but all the rest of the taxes on business and things like that are, as you mentioned, zero Republican support, and it'll be interesting to see what Governor Ferguson does with it.
Yeah, and a tax on electric vehicles, too, that really seems to target Tesla, so we'll see what happens with that one, too. I did want to make one other point on the state budget here. It contains this measure to add $100 million to police recruiting and retention for local governments around the state with the help of a locally applied 0.1% sales tax. I really think this could be a game changer here, David, because I saw a Publicola report on this too. King County's all about this. Hey, let's put this in place. This could save for a big budget shortfall that they're facing. It could be a big boon for the city too. Mayor Harrell says he's looking into it as well. What do you think about this new measure, House Bill 2015? I feel like it kind of snuck in there, but I think it could have a big impact on local governments.
Yeah, I think so too. Particularly, local governments, particularly, in blue areas, have been coming up against this 1% cap on sale or on property taxes, and
Which they
that
tried to raise this year, but were not
right,
able to. Keep going. Yeah.
right, which they tried to raise this year, but didn't happen, and this I think is a little bit of a balm to that. We know that the days of defund the police are clearly done, and
Yes.
King County and Seattle are talking about trying to hire more cops. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
Seattle's looking at $240 million in shortfalls that they need to make up, at least. Maybe that'll grow. And
Right.
I'm sure that the elected officials there are happy to accept any new revenue source. And it has the
Yeah.
added bonus of it has to be spent on public safety and law enforcement. And
Right.
I think that's probably how they wanted to spend that money anyway, even if they, so yeah, I think this does make some considerations probably a little easier this fall.
Yeah, I think so too, because that amount that Seattle could bring in, King County could bring in, could be substantial. Even with just 0.1%, that equals millions upon millions of dollars for both the city and county governments potentially. So I'm going to be tracking that one. I know you will too. I'm interested to see how that will impact budgets coming up this fall. I did want to jump back to the city council here with you, David. It's having its comprehensive plan committee meeting again this week. The council's pushing through that measure to make sure Seattle is in compliance with House Bill 1110, that so-called missing middle bill that allows for duplexes and quadplexes all over the city. And it's also this week looking at how our urban forests will affect this effort. So it looks like to me, David, I was reviewing some of this material. The mayor's office is proposing a plan to update tree planting requirements in neighborhoods, adding new incentives to plant trees, some parking waivers to help preserve trees. This was just such a contentious issue in 2023 when the council passed a tree ordinance. What's this journey going to be like for a majority of council members who were not part of that discussion? What do you see happening here with trees?
Yeah, I think this could be a sticky issue. We've heard the tree ordinance that passed was a long time coming, and yet we have still heard from a lot of these new members that they would like to revisit it.
That's right.
We have seen interest in this quite a bit. It's interesting because I think on the one hand the proposal does see a lot of encourage a lot more planting of trees, but the tricky thing is that that doesn't really satisfy a lot of folks when you're talking about trees because they don't like the idea of replacing old trees with new trees.
Sure, right.
That is kind of how trees work, generally speaking.
Quick recap. Yeah. Okay.
Nonetheless, I think there is a sort of anytime there's a sort of a visceral feeling about something that makes legislating it and policy making a little more difficult. And when someone is in their neighborhood and a tree they really like gets taken down, that has an effect because it really does change how the neighborhood looks. I'll point out that the vast majority of Seattle's tree loss is not due to development. It's usually due to, in parks and things like that, because
Yes.
we have a lot of old trees that were planted by the, homesteads that
Sure,
are now
right.
reaching the age that they start to die and fall down. And, I think there's also an argument to be made, too, that, we could tie it into the legislature. There was a bill passed that made parking mandates, rolled back some parking mandates with development. I think some people would argue that, hey, we could take the space that used to be used by parking and plant trees
Right.
there. And so, there's just a lot of it's an emotional issue, I think, for people and a sentimental one. And that makes it a contentious one in City Hall.
Agreed. And I hear what you're saying about things getting sticky in the neighborhoods, but I really saw in this report that the committee is going to look at on Friday that the city really does want to focus on those rights of way, the parks, which alone make up 42% of Seattle's tree canopy, 36% of the city's land area. That almost seems like the place where if the city wants to try to focus its efforts there, it could maybe sidestep some more of these delicate kind of tree situations in the neighborhoods. Do you see that balance there, or what do you think?
Yeah, that would be one way, but I think the bulk of the conversation seems to be unfolding in, again, people's neighborhoods, because it is what people experience a lot. There's a column in my newspaper a few months ago on the opinion side about trees in South Park, and
Yeah, right.
Kathy Moore talks about this a lot in the context of the comprehensive plan, and so for as much as people don't want this to be a development versus tree debate, it often ends up being that, for better or worse.
Yeah, I'm so interested to see where this goes with so many new council members. It seems like eager to dive into this. The mayor is putting his neck out there too. So this is something that's going to have some ramifications over the next several weeks for sure, but perhaps into the election season too. Thank you for this, David. All right. Well, coming up next year, an argument over a local nude beach with, well, plenty of naked aggression. Let's call it that. David has done some research on what's happening at Denny Blaine Park. We're going to talk about it on What's Next. David, the assignment you've always been asking for has been finally granted, nude beach reporting. I wanted to talk about this. You've been covering this in the Times. We're talking about Denny Blaine Park in Northeast Seattle. For decades, it's had a reputation as nude beach, a gathering place for a lot of people in the city's LGBTQ plus community. Now it's at the center of a lawsuit. A number of people saying the park is home to frequent public masturbation and indecent exposure. This is a little bit, it's getting a little difficult, I know, up in this neighborhood. It's a fight that's been going on for years. Can you talk about what's happening up there at Denny Blaine?
Yeah, it's a really sensitive and tough issue because Denny Blaine Park has a history as a nude beach. More than that, it has a history as an important place for the city's LGBTQ community. And then there's this other piece where the local population says that it's being used in sort of inappropriate ways. And, it is particularly contentious because there was sort of a behind-the-scenes lobbying effort from what appears to be a very rich person in Seattle who would offer basically to pay for changes to the park that would add a playground, and he was going directly to the mayor. And so the whole thing smacked of a sort of backdoor entrance into a rich person changing the use of a park that was very important to a marginalized community in Seattle. And so the issues surrounding this park were already very sensitive. And, I don't think there's any disagreement that the city should be doing more, between the people who use and enjoy this park and the people who live near the park. I don't think there's actually any disagreement that the city should be or could be doing more to prevent these kinds of issues around public masturbation or indecent exposure. The thing that I think the advocates for the park are worried about is that this lawsuit is being used sort of surreptitiously to shut down its use as a nude beach entirely, and is broader than just focusing on the public masturbation piece, which they think is solvable, but they see this lawsuit as kind of, an effort to turn it into a different sort of park than it has historically been. And so again, it's you can certainly feel sympathetic to people who live near there and are seeing this sort of misuse of the park, and that's terrible. And also, I think it's going to be sort of a tightrope walk to solve that issue while not kind of fundamentally destroying what a lot of people really love about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, how does the city come to a settlement on this? Because you don't want this lawsuit to go into court and things of that nature. What is there a way forward here that you can see, that you could chart?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could be, the people suing want the city to, I think at the end of the day, what they really want is cops to be there all the time. Other than that, there was some discussion around infrastructure. There was sort of a unfortunately worded, I think it was public masturbation deterrence infrastructure in a proposal, that the city had briefly put online, and so there's some sense that, you could, I don't know, maybe you could build something to make it more difficult. At the end of the day, I think what these people are asking for is more enforcement. We know that the Seattle Police Department is stretched thin, so maybe it includes you hire private security or something like that to look after this. Of course, has its own issues because then you've got security guards just kind of leering over people who are using it appropriately as a nude beach. So I don't know how it resolves. I assume it will before it ever gets into anything close to a courtroom, but it's going to take a little bit of doing to make it happen. Yeah,
the day they link this up to the city's surveillance camera system, then we're all in trouble. We'll see what happens there. But David, it is time to wrap up, and I saw you post about this. I got to know what happened here. You wrote, I saw this on X, big milestone today. I got my toddler to do something for me I didn't want to do. Is your kid painting the house? What's going on, man?
No, I was just sitting outside and I was holding my 7-month-old, and it was the first time I'd forgotten something inside, and I asked my toddler to go get it for me, and he's only 2.5, and he went and he got it for me and he brought it back, and I realized it was the first time I have basically used him as child labor to do something for me, and it was quite gratifying.
That's cold beers are next, man. That sounds like you've got something good going there. Well, that's great. David, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks again to patrons who support the show. If you're not a patron, please do become one. Pledges start at just $5 a month on Patreon. It's about $1.25 a show. Come on now. That would be greatly appreciated. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.